Live now. Hi, and welcome to GCAS, the Global Center for Advanced Studies, GCAS College Dublin. Today, we continue our public research presentation series with Sawyer. And Sawyer is a master's degree researcher for GCAS, and he's also a filmmaker. His film, Her Mother's Eyes, is now circulating in various festivals throughout North America and maybe even beyond. And Sawyer went to the University of Colorado in Boulder and completed his bachelor's there and now resides in Denver. Sawyer's been a valuable member of our GCAS College since he came on, first starting last summer with Kevin Boylo's course, Structuralism and Phenomenology. How are you, Sawyer?
I'm good. Yeah.
Great. Looks like you have some floral behind you in Denver. Is it, how's the weather? Is it midwinter still, or is it popping out spring?
Like 50s. Every day is like 50s in Fahrenheit.
Not bad. Yeah, not bad. Well, why don't you introduce the title and take it away from there. And looking forward to your presentation. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, the tentative title of my thesis is borrowed from history, the Pleonasm of Meaningful Work. And I'm somewhat provocatively calling meaningful work a pleonasm, as I'd like to make the case for the need to maintain a concept of work that is distinct from the concept of labor. So I'll kind of give a little background of like a high level sort of look at kind of what I'm doing with my research and my thesis, and then I'll probably deliver based on the time part of a chapter that I'm working on within the thesis. So a bit of background, multiple statistics report that, today most job seekers are seeking to find what is referred to as meaningful work. And this meaningful work is chosen over higher salary positions oftentimes. And one statistic says that 9 out of 10 people would choose meaningful work over a higher salaried position, according to Harvard Business Review. So these statistics coincide with a workplace investing in physical, mental health wellness programs, robust mission statements and values, diversity and inclusion initiatives, team building volunteer programs and initiatives. These are all indicative features of a modern workplace that is attempting to infuse itself with a sense of meaning and meaningfulness. We are at a time where many people, employers and employees alike, are so bold as to say there is no longer anymore a work life and a personal life, there's just life. So the categories of work and personal, the barriers between work and non-work are collapsing. This phrase, meaningful work, I think marks a profound shift in the lack of distinction between labor and work. When a majority of a surveyed population says they want meaningful work, it's perhaps important to take a closer look at what this term meaningful work could effectively mean as a common demand amongst thousands of surveyed individuals in a society where meaning is referred to as subjective. So additionally, work can at once refer to the positions, offices, jobs, or careers one takes up during their lifetime, while simultaneously referring to one's physical and thereby mental task of working, of spending and exerting one's energy, one's labor. When a 9-to-5 employee before his commute says, "I'm going to work," we can assume he means that he is both going to his workplace to assume his role of employee or worker, and that he's also going to labor. Additionally, work can refer to the accumulated effect of one's labor. In fact, this definition, which operates apart from the more colloquial uses, is most closely defined with the physical sciences definition. Work as the measure of energy transfer that occurs when an object is moved over a distance by an external force. So work can additionally refer to the measurement of force over time. When people say that they want meaningful work, or that we want meaningful work, or whatever, that we would choose meaningful work over a higher salaried position, there's perhaps more going on within this concept than our initial conception. So from this recent demand for meaningful work, I think a philosophical problem emerges. How does today's conception of meaningful work shape, actualize, and recuperate human potential within the workplace and constitute one's labor as meaningful beyond the distinct function of labor? The goal of my thesis is to parse out and nuance the dominant understanding of meaningful work, drawing from and attempting to synthesize the work around sovereignty in the subject and the work of Agamben and Bataille with that of Marcuse around the ritualization of language, the magical and authoritarian sort of moves within what he calls a language of total administration, as well as his concept of repressive desublimation as that relates to the individual. Additionally, I'll be working with the ideas of Marx and Arendt to categorically separate the concept of work from labor. So rather than trying to conclusively answer the question, what is work, I will attempt to trace out how meaningful work perpetuates a mode of thinking, which by its very inclusion of a harmonious pluralism, borrowing again from Marcuse, of meaning and meaningfulness, how this inhibits any historical or material iteration of work, which in turn produces and perpetuates a form of alienation. In order to come to such a conclusion, I will investigate the role of meaning as it operates in conjunction with work. As we can gather from modifier that there must be something in relation to meaningful work that can be that could be constructed as just mere work, work that is not meaningful. And furthermore, I will consider the ways in which a mode of thinking truth as possessive or possessed by the subject corresponds with a language of total administration, as I mentioned before, which bars the subject from language's transitive or poetic function, as well as the construction of knowledge. And I'll look at the ways in which the construction of knowledge relates to subjectivity and sovereignty. So I'm going to deliver a part of a passage, or part of a chapter that I'm working on. This chapter is called Live Your Truth, the Sovereign Imperative and Repressive Desublimation. And I'm just going to do some of it because this is one that I'm still working on. And it would be nice to get some feedback on it as well. So here we go. One of the points of confusion in the contemporary discourse around meaning and meaningfulness comes from the injunction that meaning is subjective. Contemporary mantras like you do you, live your truth, life is what you make of it, all coincide with a certain iteration of the phrase, meaning is subjective. This phrase by itself does not communicate much content, or perhaps assumes a certain content around the idea of subjectivity. Foucault offers a double meaning to the term subject in that the subject is both dependent and pertaining to identity. However, the use of the term subject or subjectivity varies and can vary. The recognition that everyone has their own truth, for example, a way of thinking which perhaps coincides with the phrase meaning is subjective, possesses within it a contradiction if these truths are to be taken to mean what they could. And I think herein lies the difficulties in thinking of a pluralism which can include as many truths as there are individuals. On the topic of pluralism, Marcuse remarks that today's novel feature is the flattening out of the antagonism between culture and social reality through the obliteration of oppositional, alien, and transcendent elements in higher culture by virtue of which it is constituting another dimension of reality. This liquidation of two-dimensional culture takes place not through the denial and rejection of cultural values, but through their wholesale incorporation into the established order. Through their reproduction and display on a massive scale. So Marcuse's idea of repressive desublimation, I think, illuminates the repressive nature of a societal turn in which the fulfillment of an individual's desire becomes paramount. We can perhaps explore this further in the contemporary mantra imperative, live your truth, which can be seen on t-shirts, social media, etc. This example, I think, corresponds to a way in which a transcendent category such as truth loses its ability for transcendence. So what sort of subject can this imperative, which notably necessitates an other, refer to? It seems clear at first that there's a kind of subject invoked in the imperative, live your truth, that could only achieve the demands of the imperative with a state of harmonious pluralism. So that is, the certain kinds of truths that can belong to the subject of such an imperative as live your truth are those that can be harmoniously pluralistic and are thus indifferent to one another. The subject who possesses truth, in this case, two, owns a distinct reality from the other who delivers the imperative, yet their truth is also excluded and shaped as a possession. So the instances under which the imperative live your truth operates are instances in which the subject's truth is inherently non-confronting towards another subject that would negate the other's truth as truth. The instances in which the imperative live your truth operates on a subject are instances which such a truth would be necessarily indifferent to the other, as the imperative suggests another, even though they are perhaps unseen and unrecognized by the imperative. There is no I. The kinds of truths which would become, by extension, the kinds of meanings or causalities a subject can conceive, produced in such instances of a subjective pluralism of indifference, are then, by the dictates of an unseen other, non-exclusionary. They must coexist, as we sort of mentioned. This quality of non-exclusivity necessarily renders these kinds of truths as fundamentally apolitical or perhaps pre-political and do not arise from discourse, insofar as they are immune to the truth of another as a negating force, and in turn cannot be negated. So where truth as an ideal lies outside beyond the individual, the possessive truth is robbed of a distance which Macres says is necessary for a movement towards qualitative change. This collapsing of the distance, this elimination of the quality of negation deteriorates the transgressional, the transpersonal, the transcendental. The imperative to live one's truth collapses the antagonism of the ideal by fulfilling it as a possession of the individual. And this sort of corresponds to that idea of repressive desublimation, which at first might be recognized as a sort of freedom, a freedom to live out a true self. However, there are perhaps two repressive shifts occurring. The first being that specific to, but not exclusive to the case that we're showing, this imperative, live your truth, there still exists a sovereign move, bringing in this concept of sovereignty from Bataille and Agamben, which occurs in the imperative's demand for a truth which is shaped in the moment of its production as pertaining to the individual. The repressing feature of the imperative to live one's truth, or perhaps be yourself, etc., operates from the imperative itself, as the discourse of truth collapses into harmonious indifference. This method works in conjunction with the language of total administration, as it operates on the individual, particularly in collapses the way of abstracting oneself beyond particular circumstances, producing a sort of one-dimensionality. This turn perhaps gets at what Macres means when he says that the magical, authoritarian, and ritual elements permeate language and speech. And it's here where I noticed in reading Macres, like thinking about the simultaneous working of the magical and the authoritarian within language. And I think that this sort of serves as a nice bridge or parallel between Macres and Bataille and Agamben's discourse around the sovereign. The nature of the imperative, I think, holds within it a sovereign characteristic. And Agamben, following Carl Schmitt, in delineating the paradox of sovereignty, writes, the sovereign is at the same time within and without the juridical order. The juridical order. The nuance at the same time is not superfluous. Indeed, the sovereign, having the legitimate power to suspend the validity of the law, legitimately places itself outside the law, and the law is outside of itself. It is outside of the law. Or I, the sovereign, whom outside the law, declare that there is no outside of the law. This description of the sovereign pinpoints its paradoxical structure at a moment in time. Agamben places specific emphasis on this moment as simultaneous, in which the sovereign at once working outside of a law declares the law as such. So the command or rule instantiated by the imperative is for one to live their truth. However, the truth which one may live as established before has its limitations of which we identified as the negating structure being limited. And the second being that the concept is ritualized and reworked to magically conform its subject to a contradiction. This So the sovereign power of the imperative then is the ability at once to define the conditions of truth while seemingly existing within the law. Live your truth operates with this sovereign characteristic by way of legitimating truth as a possession of the subject while obfuscating the conditions of the outside, reaching across the line it has drawn, so to speak, to limit and close down language's poetic function and the way poetics can discourse with the outside. So, however, we might also say that the move or characterization of truth as possession renders a sovereign feature within the subject, at least insofar as we follow Bataille's characterization of sovereignty. Bataille's acknowledgement of the relationship between knowledge and sovereignty, I think, is key here, as knowledge is never sovereign. Live your truth, in some sense, establishes an element of sovereignty within its subject as it collapses its truth concept from the historical iteration, which brings one back to or conforms oneself into the moment over and over again, which is also the moment of being, as Bataille might say, an animal, wanting with no future. Bataille remarks that the sovereign man lives and dies like an animal, but he is a man nevertheless. So I think I'm going to stop there. And my goal with all this is to work back in the contemporary workplace, articulating this kind of subjectivity or harmonious pluralism as it relates to the new conditions of the workplace, which place a lot of authority within the worker, him or herself, or themselves. Yeah, so that's kind of what I wanted to share today. And then if anyone has any questions or feedback or anything like that, definitely curious.
Well, that was really great. What a great summary of your master's thesis. And I wonder why, if I may ask a few questions, what sparked this interest in work? And was it some personal issues that you were challenged with in life? I'm just curious about the narrative of the thesis itself.
Yeah. So there have definitely been a lot of moments within my sort of work life, as it were, like that have made me want to sort of pivot to a more philosophical approach to how to spend my time, I think, or how to be in time or experience time or whatever. But I do think that so one of the things actually was like so this short film that we actually talked about before, when I had created this short film, I had realized that most of the time I spend doing like commercial video production work is just not the same as like the sort of pure expression when there's no, like I had produced the film as well. So I was not making the film for anybody. I was making it with a lot of people, but there wasn't sort of like, I don't know, there wasn't like an authority figure over the production process. And that made me realize that like all my other work is kind of, I don't know, dictated in a lot of ways. But I still kind of got this artistic expression from it. So I think I'm just interested in thinking about how, work or labor like tries to be sort of, I don't know, like spiritualized or given something profound beyond just being labor as a production of like a material or of the body. And so I think that's why I've been interested in Bataille, because I think that, and I think we talked about this on a last class, but like one of his founding, or he suggests that like the first principle should be, man does not live on bread alone. And I think that that's a nice starting place for thinking about meaning. And I think also like, just one more thought is like Eva and her thesis delivery talked about the idea of the prosumer. And I think that that's where I want to try to go with this idea of the concept of meaningful work, is that, how like, what are the ways in which the workplace in which we're producing, but we're also, it's like simultaneously a consuming process, instead of sort of like the separation between those two things. And I think that's a really interesting concept that she introduced that I've been thinking about too.
Yeah, it's nice to see your researchers working on the other master's thesis, their own working, having sets of questions that interact with your own. I wonder your film, Her Mother's Eyes, and we'll put the link into the chat as well as in the description so that you can have a gander at it. Others who are watching, I wonder. First, was this your first film? And then secondly, did you, in the act of the artistic act, maybe one could say, did you feel like you were, I don't know, in certain horizons of your own life experience that sort of raised the questions that you're addressing in your master's thesis? Just curious about that. It might not even be related, but I'm curious.
Like, how is the film related to the thesis?
Yeah,
Is
or
that...
just the act of creating the film, producing it, coming up with, the funding and all of that, doing it yourself and not, like, as you said, having that authority over you. Did that open up some avenues of creativity that sparked or were part of, precipitated some of your questions that you're engaging with in your master's thesis?
Yeah. I think so. And I think I was trying to get at that maybe earlier, but I do think that the artistic process, maybe, I don't know if it's like purely making the film was purely that, but like the artistic process of making a thing for itself, not making it for money or something like that, or I mean, maybe there's like, I'm making it for recognition of like the film festival or something like that. I don't know. But I think that it required a lot of like sacrifice of my time. And I had to say no to, but there was a level of importance that sort of like was produced out of that. And I think it just changed the way I think about art and work and stuff like that. But I think it's something I'm still working through.
And your supervisor is Nina Power. And I think that hopefully that relationship will help you kind of push into areas, research questions, and some of that writing that gives back some of the aesthetic pleasure of the research itself or the writing of the thesis itself. So we'll look forward to seeing how that turns out. And you joined us, I think, really officially in September, I think. So probably come August, you'll be ready to defend, if not maybe in July or something. So that'll be great. I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, and do you think you'll be able to carve out some time? I mean, the master's thesis at GCAS is 20,000 words. I wonder if you see yourself, do you write in the act of like your work? Do you carve out time during the week, or do you need those blocks of time to work?
Like, how do I, like, what's the writing process for the thesis kind of?
Yeah, for you in particular. Yeah.
I try to write a little bit every day about it. Or I try to pick up maybe where I left off, or but I think the reading and writing come together. So I'll like either start writing and then hit a wall, and then I'll do some reading, and then it brings me back, or I'll start reading something, get some ideas that kind of I can weave back through and write at that moment. So it feels like the reading and writing kind of happen very close together, I think.
That's great. I mean, when you can get that kind of dialectic working or synergy between those two, that's fantastic. And finally, I guess the other question I have is your three main figures, as I understood it from your presentation, it includes Bataille, Marcuse, and Arendt. Is that right? Or are there other figures that you're maybe working with or considering working with?
Yeah, I think so. Initially, I was like really interested in Simone Weil. But then I haven't been working with her as much. I've been like working with Marcuse a lot, and then Bataille came up when actually I was at one of like a research techniques session. Like Jamie brought up sovereign subject, talking about Bataille, and that got me really interested in how that relates to the modern workplace. And so I've been doing a lot of work with Bataille, and then Arendt too has very clear conceptions, I think, of the categories of work and labor. And so I'm eventually going to work those back in as well. But I also think like Simone Weil and Bataille are very interesting sort of, and I might work Simone Weil back in because she has a really like, you know, clear sort of approach to, I guess, subjecting oneself, where, or like, I think like for her, like, it sounds like you either, you know, I think one of her lines is like, you live or die, you live by the sword or die by the cross, or something like that. So she's very like black and white, where like you kind of have to subject yourself or you become a sovereign, or so to speak. And
Yeah,
I don't know, like, overlap.
well, it's like,
brother.
it reminds me of that song, Bob Dylan song, you have to serve somebody, right? Something like that, a bit. But okay, well, that's great. And let me just check the YouTube channel to see if, oh, what, there are questions. So I'm going to put on my glasses. Okay. So, right, we have a question from David Pasti, P-A-S-T-I. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And he asked the question, are you familiar with Agamben's analysis of Avicenna, Avicnna, the angel as the mediator between the subject and the truth, general intellect? So that's one question. I'm not sure that you're able to, I don't know if you're that familiar with Agamben.
I mean, I'm working with two Agamben texts and then an essay that he wrote responding to Bataille's sovereignty. But my knowledge of Agamben's like super limited. I'm really just working with Homo Sacer, the state of exception, and Opus Dei, but like kind of the end of Opus Dei. But I mean, yeah, like I've been very interested. I don't know what this is called. I can't see the title.
I'll forward you
Okay, cool.
the questions in particular later. And then Jamie pops on. Hi, Jamie. Hope you're doing well in England, in Bristol. He says, great presentation, Sawyer. Can Sawyer speak more on the problem of truth as it relates to the sovereign ban and its relation to work? And here's a follow-up. So, okay, I'll repeat that. Does labor or work redirect potential? So maybe you want to start with that. Do you think labor or work redirects potential?
So I think that like if we were to kind of follow like Hannah Arendt's definition of labor is just the reproduction of like I don't know, like this kind of the material self, or like and maybe I'm not giving the best definition, but it's something along the lines of like labor having to do with like a kind of materiality. And I think that beyond, so like obviously a lot of the obfuscation between labor and work, like if work is kind of like more of the condition in which like work is like the accumulated condition in which a subject or individuality can occur. I think we need to have a concept of work that is distinct from labor. So if labor is just the reproduction of the self, work has to be the reproduction of the conditions in which different selves can sort of, I guess, emerge. And so I think like the idea of making labor like really meaningful and trying to like, I don't know, make the workplace like make the workplace a really sexy place to be, and like and like also like one of the like the early texts that I was kind of working with thinking about this is like Netflix has this culture deck that was supposed to, it came out like 2009, which is supposed to be one of the most, according to like Facebook's old COO, one of the most important documents to come out of Silicon Valley, which is an interesting thing for an executive to say. But what it really does is it places all the responsibility of the worker on themselves, and they have unlimited vacation days. They don't have like bosses, as it were. Like all the accountability sort of rests on the worker. And then of course there's like their salaries are just kind of algorithmically informed based on their position as it relates to the market. But I think that this was just it got me thinking a lot about how the labor work distinction kind of collapses there, and our vocation, or our and it's interesting I just said vocation because somebody else is talking in one of those research groups about that. I don't know. I think that I don't know if I have a way to tie this all together actually, but I think that there's something about the way in which labor gets mystified or something, or gets connected to this workplace that fulfills sort of like desire or something. And I think I'm trying to connect that a little bit maybe to my personal work of video production, which is it's a bit like, well, I don't know what like I'm really producing except for like digital products that sort of make companies look sexy or something like that. And so hopefully
Nice.
Sawyer doesn't see this.
Yeah, and you and Jamie can engage with that too later. But and Manuel and David has asked a few other questions, but I wanted to pop over to Manuel, who just completed his master's and is now in the PhD program at GCAS. Manuel asked the question. Let me just read that here. It says, would you consider vocation then as a middle term between labor and work? Vocation. Just curious if you have an idea.
And I just said vocation, and I think Manuel had talked about vocation before when we were chatting about this stuff, and I haven't really given much thought to the idea of vocation, but yeah, like, I mean, sounds to me like it may be, but I think that labor does have a quality to it that is completely wrapped up in use. Like it's like, and so maybe like I think I just need to do some more thinking about.
Sure, makes sense. And then the last question, I'm just going to David has a question. He says, you mentioned Agamben and Bataille as your inspiration, but I am sure you know that Agamben is very critical about Bataille. He basically labels Bataille not useful in his recent book. So I wonder, does that detract you from Bataille, or does that make you wonder? Is there a choice between Agamben and Bataille here? I don't know, but just wondering if you were familiar with Agamben's, well, according to David anyway, Agamben's derogatory comment towards Bataille.
No,
I didn't know that either.
I think there's a discourse going on around sovereignty within their writing that I'm interested in, but I'm not trying to lump them together as yeah. I mean, I think in my sort of I mean, actually the Agamben thing that I quoted was sort of his sort of it was from a article where he was writing about like the sovereign subject and how Bataille thinks that he can sort of stack the sovereign and subject together. But I'm more concerned in the discourse of sovereignty within them, not like
against each other. Yeah, pitting each other. Okay. Yeah, well, that's good. It makes total sense. It's a good way to, I think, engage that potential debate. So great. Any other last things you want to mention before we close today's session down?
No,
okay. Great. Well, I hope this has been a helpful exercise, and thank you all for watching. Those of you who tuned in, and thanks for your questions, David and Jamie and Manuel. Thank you again, there, Sawyer, and wish you a good afternoon. It's, I guess, still in the afternoon, or just now, not even afternoon. It's still morning for you in
30.
Denver.
I'm going to go eat some breakfast now. No,
Great. Yeah, it's past dinner time here in Prague. But okay, thanks again, and wish you the best here, and we'll be in touch.
yeah.
Take
All
care.
right. Thanks you all.
Take care. Take care. And let me just close this down. Yeah. And